Yeah. So my daughter's getting her very first one on Wednesday.
I went up to the red zone.
Oh yeah.
And I had my first on my eyes.
What are you allergic to? Any specific ones?
Red maple's my top one.
Oh, you are in the wrong place.
I know. I'm allergic to all grasses, dogs, cats, trees. Like, it's crazy. And Lonnie and I are not allergic to anything.
Yeah.
Me, poison oak, but
Right.
When you eat fruit, does your mouth itch? Yeah, mine does too.
yes.
Isn't that terrible?
Cherries, stone
Apples,
fruit.
yeah. Apples. Peaches, hello, candy.
Yeah.
Again, it's been a while. Great winter road.
I'll show you
It is, but
There's some other people on station. My allergist.
I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. We're still waiting for Commissioner Heller, and so hopefully she'll join us soon. So welcome, thank you for coming to this first meeting of the Riparian Advisory Committee meeting. We're gonna talk about the Riparian Corridor Project that the city kicked off earlier this year. I wanted to start with some introductions. I guess I'll start here. Oh, sorry, Eunice, long-range planning manager. City Salem.
Lisa Anderson will be Deputy Director of Community Planning and Development.
Mark Quinn, Ward 2 resident. Jen Johnson, Natural Resources Planner.
Meredith Greer, Natural Resource Planning Manager with the City of Salem.
Bryce Bishop, Planning Division.
Natalie Gianni with Tech Engineering.
Ken Bearley, Glenn Gibson, Watershed Council, Ward 8, I guess.
John Van Staveren, Civic Habitat Services.
Greg Winterroad, Winterford Planning.
Charles Weathers, I think Outlook autofilled my name and Eunice invited me by accident.
That's what we heard.
Yeah.
Marissa Tev, Planning Commissioner and Ward 1 resident.
Deanna Glenn, Salem City Council, Ward 4.
Linda Nishioka, Salem City Councilor, Ward 2, filling in for Councilor Varney.
And Michael?
Mike DeBlasi, I work with the Department of State Lands. I'm currently the permitting coordinator for Marion County, but as of the 17th, we'll be shuffling, so I won't be having Marion County after that.
And then Jennifer is our
Admin analyst.
who's supporting us today. So I don't think we have anyone from the public here, so I was gonna hand it off.
Oh, is he on? Oh.
John, you want to kick
I
it
will,
off?
yeah, I certainly will. No, this is on here, so.
We're streaming it live, so we need that.
Oh, it's not here. It's up there.
Yeah.
All right, you do whatever you need to. Oh, I see.
I know, yeah. Studying here.
Oh, sorry, it's mine.
There you go. So you can either click through it with the remote or you can use the arrow keys on here.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming this morning. Yeah, as I said, John Van Staveren, Senior Professional Wetland Scientist with Pacific Habitat Services. I don't sound like it, but I have been in Oregon for quite a while. Ken knows this. He actually hired me once for the Department of State Lands, and I turned him down. Sorry, Ken.
I've been turned down by others.
Yeah.
We don't have to go into that.
We won't go into that, yeah, exactly right. So here's the agenda. We're going to go through the role of the RAC. I'm going to be talking about this important committee that we have here, and then talking about the whole Goal 5 process, at least in the inventory part of it. Greg is going to be talking about phase 2, which we'll get to. But I'm going to be, and my staff have been inventorying wetlands and then riparian areas throughout the city, and I'll go into detail on that next. And you can stop me. I've got questions at the end, but absolutely stop me anytime you need to. So the purpose of the RAC is obviously to receive an update on what we have been doing, what the city has hired us to do. And it's an important job because the city really was without, you have a local wetlands inventory. It does not have significant wetlands that have been identified, but you do not have a riparian inventory. And I have actually managed the most inventories throughout the state, worked in many different communities throughout the state, and have worked on the inventory portion of it, and then also coming up with a method or an ordinance to protect those riparian areas. And so I'm very familiar with the whole process for sure. So it's great that Salem is finally getting to this point. And so the committee, I was thinking about why the RAC is an important committee, and that is, but one of the reasons anyway, is that you're diverse opinions and they count. The city is embarking on this protection measure. It's going to affect land use, people's properties, etc. It's important to have open communication. And like I said, I've been through these inventories before. One of the things that I say in the first public meeting is that communication is key, because I am coming in as a consultant. I'm inventorying, their resources because I've been trained to do that. But really, property owners know, and city councils and planning commission and staff of the city know the city way better than I do. Yes, I've been here for many years, but I've not lived here, not been part of the community. So it's important to get all of those voices, and we have quite a few around the table here. So that's great. Okay, so what is Goal 5? So Goal 5 is one of 19 statewide planning goals. I kind of think revolutionary when they were adopted in 1973. And what they do, these goals, and Greg can talk about it way more eloquently than I can, but these goals basically set the framework for how you balance life in Oregon, natural resources, industries, etc. And so they're very important. And the city council directed city staff to work on Goal 5 riparian corridor inventory process. So I've been working on that, obviously, and these are the statewide planning goals. And Goal 5, natural resources, scenic and historic areas, and open space. Let's see. All right, so the riparian corridors, Goal 5 resources that we usually inventory are riparian corridors, wetlands, wildlife habitat, and you can see that there's a whole bunch of others here that are on this list. So what we're focusing on here are riparian corridors, and it requires local government to, first of all, do the inventory, and then to protect those significant resources that have been inventoried. And so, and this is where we are now, obviously. It's a two-part process: local resource inventory, like I'm doing, and then it's going to be handed over to Greg and the planning folks here to actually do the protection part of it. So what is a riparian corridor? So a riparian area is the vegetation that is adjacent to a stream. It doesn't have to be fish bearing, just a stream, or a lake. And then you can have a wetland that's adjacent to that stream. And then the whole thing is called a riparian corridor if that wetland is significant, and I will get into that. So you can envision here, yes, it's a riparian area inventory, but it's really a Goal 5 riparian corridor inventory, and that term is important. And what's also important is determining which are fish bearing. So we've got data from ODFW, from the Department of Forestry. The city has this data. We've incorporated it into our GIS maps. And if the stream or lake, there is one lake here that is fish bearing, then you can have a riparian corridor adjacent to that if you have a wetland, a significant wetland, which like I said, I'll get into that. Let's see, doing two things here at once. So why plan for riparian corridors? Because it protects the resource, but it allows you, and you're going to go through this process now, once we complete the inventory and you get to the next phase of ensuring that the protections are really focused on the local community. And I've done a lot of these inventories where we have done a standard inventory, and that standard inventory can go out to 120 feet adjacent to streams. The city has proposed to only do the safe harbor inventory, which is a 50-foot setback or a 75 along the Willamette. Every single time I've gone through the standard inventory process, it's got to the planning commission, the city council, and they've pulled it back to 50 feet just because there's been such an uproar about protecting 120 feet. So what riparian corridors do, what we're going to be doing here is it optimizes the streams for residents, it protects the resource, and it makes sure that the future planning is done in such a way that it's, safeguards the resource itself, so the wildlife habitat and the functions that riparian areas and riparian corridors provide, but also it's done in such a way that it fits in with the community. All right, so here's the two-phase process. We are at the inventory and assessment phase, and like I said, the city has chosen to do the safe harbor approach. Safe harbor means that it is a set 50-foot setback adjacent to riparian areas, or 75 feet along the Willamette River, any stream that has 1,000 cubic feet flow. And then phase two, which is what Greg will discuss, can go both ways too. You can go safe harbor where you adopt an ordinance, or you can go through a standard process where you can go through a reporting and analysis called ESEE. And I'm assuming you'll discuss that. Okay. All right, so preliminary map here that you can see, this is what we started out with, and this is all, as you can imagine, done with GIS nowadays. We have 110 miles or just over of waterways. Just gonna try and get us a better view. Sure.
Here we go.
It's gone away. All right. So we have 110, just over 110 miles of waterways in the city. 78 miles of those are fish bearing, and 32 miles are non-fish bearing. All right, so we have inventoried fish-bearing streams, like I said, and we got that data from a couple of sources, ODFW, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Department of Forestry, and also the city has their own mapping that we used. We have identified wetlands, so not delineated. Delineated is where we go out and we actually stake and flag the wetland boundary, but this was an inventory, and so we go through the process of just taking a look, taking some data for sure. We need to do that for the Department of State Lands, but going through and approximately identifying where the wetlands are located. We're currently preparing the final map and data and report, and then Community Planning and Development Department will implement phase two, which is the protection plan. All right. And so this is a study area with all of the creeks you have in Salem and the Willamette River. And this shows an area, as you can see, not too far from where we are, the Millrace, Pringle Creek, and then Mill Creek. And just a rundown of the process. So we requested, this is back at the beginning of this year, we requested people's permission to access their properties. And the area that we're inventorying, so like I said before, the city has a citywide local wetlands inventory. We only focused on a corridor, an area that was 200 feet either side of the center line of all streams. And so we're not redoing the local wetlands inventory. We're just making sure that we understand where all the resources are within that area, that 400-foot wide area. And we had our first meeting in February that went well. We had a pretty good turnout. So we went through and we asked permission from those people. The city sent out notices to all property owners along streams and said, hey, can we access your property? And that really helped us because we were able to go onto people's properties and verify more accurately where the wetland boundaries are, where the streams are. And so that was great. So we got good feedback, like I said. We also requested wetland delineations from the Department of State Lands. And this is something we always do, we need to do for inventories. So we get those delineations that have been conducted, since who knows when, for many, many years. And we have to, 1989, we have to painstakingly digitize all of those boundaries. Now, Department of State Lands is actually changing, and they will soon require that all delineators actually submit a GIS file. So we know where they are. But we couldn't do that. So what we had to do was to go through and digitize all of those wetland boundaries and then put them on the map. So we've done that. And then we have also conducted pretty much all of the field work. And like I said, it was 200 feet from the center line of the all waterways. And then all that information goes into GIS. We have data sheets, and those data sheets will be going to DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development, and then Department of State Lands for their review. And eventually that GIS information is going to be available at the city. So if you can access your property, you'll see whether you have a riparian corridor on your property. And then one of the things we did too is that we have assessed the quality of the wetlands. And it's this important part of the process. When the city decided to go through the safe harbor process, we needed to determine the significance of wetlands. And I'll go into that in a sec. Now we're at our first RAC meeting, and we will have the second public meeting next year, in the spring of 2026. We will complete our riparian report and the local wetland inventory within that corridor area, 400 feet. The local wetland inventory portion will go to Department of State Lands, where they will review it. Jebra Brown is the manager over there, so she knows it's coming. And then the riparian part of it will go to DLCD for their review. And then once we get feedback from those agencies, we will produce a final report, and then our work actually will be done at that point.
Will the draft report be available to the public general?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, no reason why not. Yeah, yeah.
And roughly when would that be?
I would say next couple of months for sure. Yeah. Yes.
Is there any historic wetland inventory that, things like out on the DOC lands, that was hundreds of acres of wetland?
Yeah, you mean like,
Is there any reference to that or any idea of where wetlands used to be?
No, unfortunately not. Yeah, if it's developed, we go with what's in the delineations and then what we see on the ground here now. Yeah, not historical.
But there is mapping like Willamette Basin wide. John Christie, Ed Alderson published a map of the Willamette Valley, a historic map from the General Land Office surveys. And I could get that to you.
Oh, that'd be really helpful.
There's also national wetland inventory. But
No, this was from the General Land Office. But there's also
that's
national
state- that's a
wetlands.
state
But,
level.
Yeah.
There's lots of data sources to find wetlands besides this.
Yeah. There's a fantastic source of data in the metro area where you can go back to the 1850s and see what was meant there. But I don't think it came down as far as Salem. Right?
No, the Christie Alderson map is for the entire Willamette Valley.
Okay.
They mapped the historic vegetation of Willamette
Yeah,
Valley.
right.
And that's
Yeah. All right, so we're riparian corridor, which I've been discussing here. Like I said, it's that riparian area. It's the stream in the middle. And not all streams, of course, but many streams have an adjacent wetland. All right, so when we did the inventory of wetlands, we used the Corps of Engineers manual, and there's a supplement to this manual, and 3 criteria to be a wetland. I'm not going to go into detail here, but you need to have the vegetation that likes to grow with its feet wet, so a certain type of vegetation, hydrophytic vegetation, hydric soils, so those are soils that you only find in wetlands that are formed under wet conditions, and then you need to have wetland hydrology. And the wetland hydrology has its own criteria. Now, I'm not going to go into this for sure in this presentation, but the Corps of Engineers, they have changed the definition of wetlands. They're still using this manual, but what the regulators changed. Department of State Lands has stuck to their guns and would regulate pretty much any wetland unless it's artificial, but the Corps of Engineers is not that way. So we do a determination of the functions and conditions of the wetlands, and we use a manual called OFWAM, or the Oregon Freshwater Wetland Assessment Methodology. Been around since the 1990s, and it's a relatively simple methodology. There is one called ORWAP, the Oregon Rapid Wetland Assessment Protocol, which is a more complicated and comprehensive, but it doesn't work as well in these Goal 5 inventories. We have tried to manipulate it and get it to work, but it just doesn't work as well. And so this manual is used, and it's in the criteria that is state law for determining a significant wetland. And I have been around a while because actually I was on that committee that came up with the criteria for determining significant wetlands. And so we use OFWAM, and we apply it to all wetlands that we find within that area that we're looking at. And we specifically look at, it looks at different functions and conditions, but we specifically focus on the flood control, hydrologic control, fish and wildlife habitat, and the water quality. And then, like I said, it looks at other ones that we don't actually determine whether it's significant or used in the determination of significance. Recreation, education, there's some other ones too that are not looked at. All right, so here is our map. And this is available on GIS. So we have some GIS files that we're going to be sending to the city. But this shows fish bearing, non-fish bearing streams, and the overview of where everything is. I'm going to go into a detail here. So this is a detailed map of pretty much what I've shown before. And you can see here that it's got, let's get that out of the way a little bit. Back, but you can see here that locally significant wetlands are these with the yellow stripes, and obviously these blue areas are wetland, and then fish bearing and non-fish bearing. These are all pretty much fish bearing. You've got non-fish bearing up here. And so, like I said, these are all in GIS. They'll be available to be pulled up.
The first larger map that John was showing is also printed out on both these easels back here and in the center of the table there. This is kind of divided into 16 different little mini maps. We've got 2 copies if you want to take a look, a closer look at kind of what that ends up looking like.
So we identified 191 total wetlands, or 421 acres of wetlands within that 400-foot swath. 96 of those were locally significant, covering about 297 acres. We had 113.8, almost 114 miles of stream, with almost 90 miles of which are fish bearing. That area is 6,900 acres, and within that 6,900 acre area we looked at, we have 2,226 acres of safe harbor buffer area, which will be what Greg is going to be talking about to protect, and 134 DSL code wetlands that we had to check each one of those wetlands just to make sure it was still accurate and that our digitizing correctly identifies the wetlands. So that is my presentation. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Do you have information on water rights? that, you know, are people able to suck a stream dry?
No, that's Water Resources Department. We don't get into that.
I would think that'd be important for us to know.
Well, water rights are important for sure. I mean, they've been around for many, many
The
years,
riparian
obviously.
areas and
Yeah,
fish and.
right. But they don't physically change the channels, and yes, I mean, dams can be built and change, you know, the hydrology, no doubt, but that's not part of this study.
Please put last slide on.
Sure.
We can email these slides out. Thank you.
You said the setback is 50 feet a number of times. Is that 50 like feet that you would physically travel up the bank? Are we going from top of bank? Or
Top of bank.
Okay.
Yeah, 50 feet. So it's 50 feet from top of bank, unless there's a significant wetland. If there's a significant wetland adjacent to the creek, then it's 50 feet from the edge of that wetland out. So it could be 100 feet, you know, who knows?
But if the bank's 15 feet up, you don't get credit for that.
No, exactly right. It's a horizontal from top of bank. Yes,
And then things like the Mill Race and Shelton Ditch,
yeah,
which are not natural streams.
right.
Those count as riparian
They,
areas.
they do, exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah. They've
And
got a lot of fish in them.
is there a water right associated to guarantee that those are gonna continue to flow?
Well, it's complicated with Shelton Ditch because that's, I forget, what's the irrigation district?
Stadium irrigation.
Yeah, Santiam Irrigation District controls the flow. So there's a, you know, a relationship that the city of Salem has with that irrigation district. I mean, I don't know if the city wants to, if somebody here knows about that. I don't know about it.
But there are water rights associated with the flows in the Shelton Ditch.
Yeah,
And I'm assuming the Mill Race too. And
Exactly.
those are both important water features for the city.
For
And
sure.
I'm just wanting to make sure that we make sure it's gonna continue on.
Oh, yeah.
And we're gonna continue to have the water.
well, water rights, we won't get into water rights here, but that's a whole, as you know, legal process and many, many years old and, it's complicated. Yes,
We've been talking about doing up the latest ODFW fish survey was 99.
yeah,
And we've been talking with the Watershed Council about doing an EDNA study of
Yeah.
particularly the waterways in West Salem, perhaps citywide. How would that affect subsequent decisions about, I mean, could affect the
it could,
inventory, et cetera.
yeah.
So
So, and if folks don't know what it is, so, and we do this. We
Environmental
monitor
DNA.
it. Yeah, I mean, so we take water samples and we send those off to a lab and they can see which fish are in that waterway because of the DNA that's in there. So they can actually go to the species, say you had a, you know, salmon here or sculpin or whatever the case may be. But yes, I would think if new information arose, then you could have an update. It depends on where, you know, I don't know, how quickly are you doing that study?
well, since Brook and Tula is furloughed,
Okay, all right.
we're trying to get an alternative bid. So I'm supposed to get at least a proposal here shortly.
Yeah, but I can imagine that's new information.
Yes.
And so, yes, it would be something that would be updated in the inventory.
Mike has a question online.
Oh, sure. Oh, yes.
Yeah, so with you said 75-foot buffer on the Willamette, how does the greenway interact with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do not know the answer to that. Do you?
City of Salem does not have a Willamette Greenway plan,
We do.
We do.
other than the rudimentary one that was done in the '70s.
And we have an ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know how this affects? The greenway?
The greenway has its own setbacks that are based on, you have to establish a riparian corridor, with a riparian buffer, in the ordinance, basic, compliance with, statewide planning goals, yeah. And it's 75, it's based on the topography of the bank. So, and then that riparian buffer, there's limits on what you can do, water dependent, water related uses are allowed, other disturbances aren't allowed, so. Yeah. They would harmonize together, they would go along with each other.
with John on many projects and also independently, a number of them involve the Willamette River. And we always treat that stuff not as part of the Goal 5 inventory. So it wouldn't, but if you had a river, which they do, like the Columbia River, that has a 75-foot setback if you're in St. Helens, for example. Yeah, because there's no Columbia River Greenway.
As we move into the planning stage, and I know we're jumping ahead here, how does the recent draft EIS on the integration of National Flood Insurance Program with Endangered Species Act and the riparian buffer setback or what do they call it, riparian buffer zone, affect what's going on here? Because a lot of these streams have special flood hazard areas. And so the 170-foot riparian buffer zone could be an overlay of requirements for mitigation within or beyond the Goal 5 protection. So will that be wrestled with as you work on the planning side?
Do we want to wait until we get into
That's probably wise.
I mean, that's a technical question.
I have a question that I think is really bouncing off Ken. I'm trying to understand if part of this riparian zone is trying to help support the land to be more of a sponge for major flooding, and if so, the wider space, I'm just kind of wondering about if there are areas that may need to be expanded instead of the 50 feet. Again, just trying to help us in mitigating flooding.
Well, as Ken correctly brought up, you do have another overlay that's at the federal level, so that is 170 feet, they call it the riparian buffer zone. And that's specifically to protect endangered species. So and that's all about protecting areas from flooding.
So, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah.
Ken really brought it in more than I understand.
Yeah, local level 50 feet, federal level up to 170 feet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The primary purpose under Goal 5 is protecting more wildlife habitat. It's more of a habitat protection.
Instead of mitigation.
Instead of mitigation, right.
Okay.
Just remember, shade where canopy is, I don't know where the waterway is cool.
So that will depend, like with certain soils need to be added, certain plants need to be added in some of these riparian areas, but that could even expand further.
I don't know if it'd like really get into like changing, it would be like really the second phase determining what's allowed in that setback area.
Okay.
Not like overgrade or anything that would disturb that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to clarify / point out that this inventory is only for wetlands connected to streams.
Yep.
Or rivers.
Yep.
So anything that would be upland of that
Is not
is
protected.
not inventoried.
Not inventory, yeah. And it still has state and maybe federal protection. That's not part of the inventory, correctly.
Other than the previous inventory that was done.
Where, yes,
Yeah,
exactly right. That was done a while ago, but yeah, no significance determination for those wetlands. So they don't protect it at the local level.
Screen share again.
Isn't it already?
Yeah, it's like you said, many assistance with this. Okay, good.
Let's do a new old presentation.
Yeah,
So
you just stop.
stop and then
Stop this right here.
change to.
Okay, I got it. Okay, thank you. All right.
Oh, so any other questions about what I discussed? Sounds good. Okay.
I know there's parts of West Salem where the ODF and W considers the streams to be fish bearing, but there is like structural things impeding fish bearing and things that will not go away. Like I know ODF and W in the past has been like, even though you might have culverts that would impede fish passage, eventually they'll all be replaced. And so we need to treat new ones upstream as if they're fish passage, but there's parts of West Salem where
it's piped through a subdivision.
Yeah.
We're not taking that out. Is that taken into account in this, or are we still treating it like ODF&W says it's fish passage, or it's fish bearing even though fish can't
Yeah,
get
so
to it?
the two things, one is sometimes it's taken into account if there truly are no fish upstream, like if it's an intermittent stream and it dries up above that break point, then no way, because fish can't survive.
Mhm.
But what ODFW, and we've talked to them about this over the years at DLCD, we said, okay, you say fish bearing, but what do you mean by fish bearing? They mean any fish. So it could be something that's non-native, it's just, it is a fish in that creek. And what we find is that we do have long culverts, breakages, whatever the case may be, where the fish can't get up there. But there's still fish living in those areas that are isolated. So yes, in that sense, ODFW, there's no fish passage going back and forth, but there are fish living in there because it's a perennial waterway and they can survive.
Okay, we're still having to do fish passage though. in
I
those
know,
areas.
it's very different, but yes, yeah, fish passage is quite a thing. I mean, it's ramped up, as you well know,
Mhm.
yeah, in recent years.
And it's very different. There are native fish that are, live in a, cool stream that are resident fish. Then there are anadromous fish, and the ones that we commonly think of that move up and downstream are anadromous fish, like steelhead, salmon that come up in the streams and then go back. But there are also resident fish that can live above waterfalls, above all kinds of barriers, both human and natural barriers. So they don't make that distinction when they're talking about fish bearing streams.
All right, so I'll take off. Let me first say, I'm glad to be.
One more question.
Yep.
We have a lot of gravel pits in town.
Yeah.
And I don't see that they're considered riparian.
It probably not, yeah, it depends. If they're gravel pits that have been abandoned,
Yeah.
then they potentially would be. But and if they're fish bearing within those gravel pits, then they potentially would be. So,
Yeah, I just, there's a few of them out here that I think probably have fish. You know, they're close to the creeks.
are they close, or they have to be connected though to,
Well, when there's a flood, they're connected.
yeah, but we're talking about that 200-foot area. So those will be inventoried in the local wetlands inventory, but they're not within the riparian corridor inventory, because we're just focused on the streams themselves.
I would say usually gravel pits are not part of the LWI, but they can be. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
So,
I think we probably should have them as part. You know, they're a nice resource we should probably use better.
But in the scope of this project, if they're not connected to the water, then that's beyond the scope of the riparian corridor. We're trying to keep under Goal 5, that protection. It'd be a part of the LD, separate resource.
yeah, you're asking a series of very good questions, but in a way, especially the safe harbor process is pretty circumscribed. You do this, and it doesn't cover a lot of issues. I also want to say that Ken here is one of the most respected people I know. And I don't know you well, but I know of you.
You don't know many people.
And so he has great sense of humor, so you're fortunate to have him on this committee. And yeah, I would say he knows more than I do. So with that, and also John and I have a long history going back, and I want to make one correction to something you said, John.
Yeah, you can't do that.
So John and I worked, this is back at the turn of the century, we worked for the city of Corvallis together. And Corvallis has probably, for a city, the most comprehensive natural features program, which includes goal 5, 6, and 7 that are integrated of any place I know. And of course, Ken, there's a lot of places I don't know. And we did a comprehensive wetlands inventory. We did tree grows, we did significant vegetation. Also the relationship between floodplain management and did the inventory part of that, and we did more of the protection program part, where we worked together a lot. And they did actually had, I think you did it. Did you do urea inventory for the riparian?
Yeah,
They actually used that inventory. And then they came up with a whole series of specialized programs for their stream corridors based on a very detailed easy analysis. And that project, in today's dollars, would be probably a $2 million project. So it's a ton of work to do those things. And that's the only thing I wanted to correct. So sometimes your inventories actually do get used, John.
well, it's rare that the standing inventory goes all the way through. We wrote the methodology that the state uses for determining riparian corridors, the significance of riparian corridors, and the widths of riparian corridors. And like I said, we've gone through many projects where we do safe harbor and standing inventory side by side. And it gets to the planning commission, city council, that will sit down just to safe harbor. So,
yeah,
except for that.
That is true.
Yeah.
All right, so a little bit about the Goal 5 process, which is not in my presentation, it might be useful. So Goal 5 initially was a somewhat neglected goal at the state level, I would say. And there were more important goals like housing, economic development, urban growth boundaries. Those are the main things. And not every city, including Salem, has had what I would call a robust Goal 5 program. Corvallis has, Eugene has, Portland has. Many cities in the state really have no Goal 5 program at all. Many cities have no local wetland inventory, and there's a lot of small towns that don't. The state got tired, this is way back when, of LCDC making things up as they went along. Because LCDC would do an acknowledgement report, and out of that acknowledgement report would become, oh, this is what the goal means now. And that happened all through the late 70s, early 80s. In the early 80s, the Oregon legislature said enough of that. You need to put this stuff in administrative rules. When you make a policy choice, the public needs to be aware of it. It has to be in a formally adopted administrative rule. And since then, a lot of the administrative rules that LCDC adopted have been also adopted in statute by the legislature. And all this stuff gets interpreted by the Land Use Board of Appeals. And so there's a whole lot of case law that goes into some of the research that we do. There's knowledge of the administrative rules. I was there when the administrative rule was written. I was also on committees, and people can disagree about some of what those administrative rules mean. With all that in mind, now I'm going to tell you the truth about this administrative rules. All right. So I took this picture. This is off a commonly available public source, and it just shows Mill Creek go into a part of Salem where the creek looks pretty intact. You know, it's flowing well. It's got riparian vegetation on both sides, and this is what many people commonly think of an intact riparian corridor. You go 50 feet on either side of that. You allow much to happen inside that 50-foot corridor. You can pretty readily see the top of the bank where it's flowing. It's guessable, even looking here within 6 inches or so where it fluctuates. It's a 2-year flood event. But when you're doing a citywide inventory, you don't necessarily know where that top of the bank is. And in the citywide inventory, it's common to have this, but it's also common to have development very close to the creek. And there's a question about what do we do in that situation? Okay. And so this is John's inventory. Yes, which is inventory. You can see the fish-bearing streams all marked, I believe, in yellow, John. Is that correct? And then
This one, yeah.
Yeah, and then you can see other streams that begin to flow into those. But that's the GIS mapping that we all rely on. Again, citywide mapping though, so don't overestimate its accuracy on individual parcels. That's an important fact.
I will say one thing about that is that we use LiDAR. LiDAR is a very detailed topographic, map available to us. And we have the bank mapping available in GIS, but we could see where there were errors, and then we use LiDAR to correct that. So we think we got
You do that as part of the actual inventory.
Yeah, we got that as accurate as we could.
Yes, okay. And it's not that it's inaccurate, it's just that, for example, streams can change at this.
Right.
And so the point is it's a preliminary map that is good enough, I think, for doing zoning and for measuring the 50-foot setback from. But there is a provision in the safe harbor rules that allows for mapping errors where you can go on site, have a local determination by engineer. Where is that 2-year flood elevation? And so the rules require that you have a provision that allows that to be challenged. Yeah, and we use LiDAR now too, but that didn't used to be available.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And there was some pretty, go ahead.
Do you want to briefly explain what a safe harbor generally is?
I'm sorry.
Do you want to give a brief explanation of what a safe harbor generally is in case
I'm
folks
going to get there shortly. Okay. So here's the thing. So there's Goal 5 rule offers a standard option, which requires, as John was saying, something called an environmental, social, energy, and economic analysis. I got the needs mixed up. And that local option is something that city considered and where the city was going originally, because it allows a lot of local flexibility. It also requires a lot of additional work and it costs more. So, and the Riparian corridor, which is where we are now, protects only fish-bearing streams as defined by ODFW and Department of Forestry. So can't have the question, well, we're going to figure out where those fish really are. And I think the procedure would be, you have to get ODFW to first change it, because the rule doesn't talk about changing those maps. Those are based on state maps, and that's what you use. We don't. So I think it'd be a 2-step process. I don't know that. I've never heard of it being done before, but I think that's how it would work.
I know that they've used it to update the Department of Forestry maps.
Yes.
So, but
Yep.
that's
So
a good question.
I think that,
Yeah.
Okay. So the city is planning to do the safe harbor option due to lack of funding. It's a budgetary issue. Except the Willamette River, everything that's shown as a fish-bearing stream is covered by this safe harbor process. As John said, also, if there's a significant wetland that shows up on the updated local wetland inventory, then you must, it's not you may, you must measure the setback 50 feet from the exterior edge of the wetland that is within 50 feet, any portion of which is within 50 feet of the top of bank of the stream. So those measurements are important, and that's why I was talking about there needs to be cases where if a large developer comes in or someone just wants to do renovation of the house, they say, we don't think the stream is where your maps show it. And maybe that's changed in the last 2 years because of a flood situation. They have the opportunity to go on and change the map, which has the effect of really changing the inventory for that specific location. And without that, at least in my experience, property owners are really concerned because you don't want to be subject to an inventory that can't change that was done at a citywide level. And so it's really a property owner protection. They sometimes find when they do the on-site analysis, that their setback got bigger. So it can happen both ways. Okay, so
I have a question about that.
of course,
So that process would look like the landowner hiring a private engineer to do that work and then submitting like the line work in GIS to, would that be like city staff or to two state agencies?
no, to the city staff, it's a local process. And I want to be careful here, because I think that's how it should work. In my experience, city or county staff will sometimes go out there and look at it, and it's obvious the stream changed, and so they can say, we can, in some cases, make that change. The problem is when you have a quasi-judicial process with people on both sides, it's usually better to have an expert say, even if it's obvious. I mean, yeah, so does that, there's some latitude, I think, for local discretion.
So one thing about that though is that we have a GIS, access that everyone does, and it would show where the stream, the significant wetland is located. Then the property owner hires a person to do a delineation that is sent into the state, they approve that. That will not show on that GIS map. That will just be when going through the planning process, it'll be available at the city level.
Gotcha.
But the actual city map won't be updated until there's a big update. So
Yeah.
So that if they then sold that property the next year,
yeah,
the new owner would potentially have to do that again.
no, it'll stay with the property.
Yeah, there would be a record of it.
Yeah,
And
Okay.
in some ordinances that I've written, which I think is a good idea, is you take these incremental changes. And every 5 years or so, you update them, and then you keep also the local record of what happened. But that's a very important part of it. So what is allowed inside the setback? Okay, basically, what the rule gets at is don't be mowing down vegetation and don't be putting in hard surfaces. That's generally, it's not allowed. You can, if you have a structure there, replace that structure in the same location without going through a lot of rigmarole. You can remove non-native vegetation. And you should replace it though with native vegetation. That also, to me, requires a little bit of common sense in how it's applied. We'll talk about that in a minute. You can allow water-dependent uses. It's amazing what people will call a water-dependent use. It usually means something like a dock, but definitely needs water. I've seen people stretch that. I'd recommend you have a definition of water-dependent uses so people don't abuse that. And you're allowed to have public facilities, roads, drainage facilities, that kind of thing. So your question about the, if you're an irrigation district, you can go in and take care of those irrigation facilities, the road access to them, that kind of stuff. So and there is also, you're supposed to minimize intrusion, but that can be done, well, some jurisdictions do it over the counter, some jurisdictions require a type 2 analysis. So, but I think you want to be designing an ordinance. It's important that you allow some reasonable staff discretion from Oregon's process whenever you think requires a type 2 public notice, which is a bit of an administrative problem. So you have to use some judgment about what we can do is clearly allowable over the counter, like a type 1 process, and what we have to send up. A lot of small towns have these, and I can pretty much guarantee you that they probably do it if they ever got challenged in a way that you could successfully challenge it, because it's more loosey-goosey and it's a small town and nobody appeals. You're in a bigger town, so I think you have to be more careful. This is all my aside statements, and by the way, for men, Lucy might be saying this, and she might be shaking her head a little bit of time, because there's a way that if you interpret the rule just hard and fast, or if you allow some degree of discretion. It's a judgment call. So one of the flexibility provisions in the safe harbor program is that you can adjust the riparian buffer, basically. A lot of communities have ways to do this. The rule says you have to equally or better protect the riparian resource, and that's all it says. All it says. And what many jurisdictions do, and what I would recommend, is you have fairly specific standards for when you allow an incursion into that 50-foot buffer, and what you do if there is an incursion. Most jurisdictions have something that says you can replace invasive species with riparian vegetation. I'd recommend that you be very specific about what that means, the planting level, so it isn't a totally discretionary grab bag process. If you want to see a jurisdiction that does that in very great detail, Clean Water Services, which is a service district in Portland and manages the whole Tualatin Valley, riparian corridor process, wetland process. They have very specific standards about how you change that buffer and when you allow incursions and what you have to do. I don't think you need to be that specific, but I think you could look at it as a place. As we talked about, the protection ordinance must allow for mapping errors. And the mapping error doesn't mean that John's inventory was wrong. It means that they have more specific information now. And you have to allow for a hardship ordinance. And the way this, yeah, the intent behind this, yeah, is because what I was there when it was written was if there was a taking, the constitutional taking of property where you can't do anything with it. I think in practice, variances are often allowed if you have a major incursion in somebody's property. Like you can only build a 20-foot square house, you can't really put it in a house. Again, this will be a discussion. But so you have to have the hardship variance. I was asked, can you give examples of other cities that have used safe harbor? And we did just a ton of work in the Portland region before there was Metro Title III and before there was Metro Title 13, which it's a huge overlay. So all the safe harbors in the Portland area that we worked on aren't there anymore because they had to be adapted to meet Metro requirements. And in many cases, those requirements are being administered by special service districts. So I was searching all the places that I thought safe harbors existed, but they're not there anymore. So then I thought, what else? So we did the city of Woodburns years ago, and I checked and it's still there, pretty much the way it was drafted years ago. It's about the simplest safe harbor I know. I don't think it's suitable for Salem. I think you need something more sophisticated, but I think it's a good starting point for addressing this. And the same for the city of the Dalles, Oregon. They also have the safe harbor provision that's intact. And John, did you know if the district?
Yeah, Dundee, we just helped them write one for, we did in a relatively small area, but they adopted a safe harbor ordinance for their streams.
So, but I don't know of any, Eugene doesn't have that. Eugene went easy analysis the whole way. Corvallis was easy analysis. There's actually, you can see in Corvallis some elements of the safe harbor, which I would call a modified safe harbor, which they applied to Dixon Creek, which is a a lot like Mill Creek, in the sense it's pretty developed most of its way. But it is intermixed with floodplain regulations that also do things like ensure the sponge effect of what happens in a floodplain. And overlays with special vegetation protection, and for tree groves and for slide hazards. And that's why they have a complete integrated natural features, goal 5, 6, 7 ordinance, which is very complex and was expensive to put together, but it's probably the most effective local government program in terms of protecting resources. I would also say that Corvallis and Salem are way different places, politically and locationally and other things, and very few jurisdictions, none. In fact, maybe the city of Portland has put the investment that Corvallis has into their program. Eugene's done a lot, 2. Ashland's done a lot, 2. Those are the most aggressive in goal 5 protection on Europe. Okay.
Albany has one too, I think.
Albany too, Albany's is, we worked on that, and it was sort of also began as a safe harbor and got modified a lot. Yeah, but Albany you can look at, it was a long process.
I was there.
You were there. That's what I recognize you. Yes, yes. That's it. You were there. Okay. Yeah, so you have a local expert in that. And yeah, we could do an easy analysis. It went through a lot of changes. Is that fair to say? Okay, sure. I saw you. I know this woman. That's good. Okay, I'm going the wrong way, I think. Okay. No. All right, so that's it. Oh, but what I want to say about this, so this is a photograph taken from the Salem Reporter last year, and it talked about a neighborhood getting together and seeking to improve the riparian corridor. And you can see on the one side, it looks pretty good. On the other side, by the houses, it's been armored, it's been disturbed over the years, it's full of ivy. One of the things they can do under the safe harbor is go in and fix that up. That's allowed use, that's encouraged. And so if you pull the ivy, you definitely don't want to just leave that bare, you replace with native vegetation. You can see a road there that's also there. And you can see the road is within 50 feet of the top of the bank of the stream. And so you repair that road, you could do riparian restoration. I would recommend that when you do riparian restoration, you have someone like John or Ken or Winterbrook working on that to make sure it's done right. And so have a professional standard. But that's something that fits very neatly into the safe harbor things. You can do repairs. You can see, I don't know if that stairway went down to a dock in Mill Creek, it seems very likely that would be a water dependent use. And you can imagine what that stream corridor could look like if it were restored. Maybe, and Ken, I have a question for you now. Could you go in and in any way change or terrace the level of that, of the angle of the 20 foot of the shore next to the stream?
It depends on so many things, how close the road is and
Yeah.
what kind of, whether you get below the top of bank and how much material you move. So it becomes a regulatory frightening mess, but
Yeah, could you do restoration?
you could do restoration there,
It's
but
difficult.
you would still have to get it permitted.
Yeah, because that's almost the place where you can see it's pretty eroded on
And
the
it
bank.
could be extremely expensive,
To do that also.
smaller.
So probably it's mainly focusing on vegetation.
You'd have to have
and stuff.
pretty good funding to do that.
How do other cities encourage? I guess where do they direct? Someone's restoration might be someone else's like noxious
Yes.
thing. So like where does those standards come from? Considering we should probably adopt some.
Well, if, and I'd like John to look at this too, if we were drafting, or if John was drafting, I think what we do is look at what other jurisdictions do. And provide a range of options and say, this is the one that we think is right for Salem. But my bias is to be as specific as possible so that, because we represent developers also in projects. And if something says you have to do it, developer says, okay, we'll do it. If something's vague, then they'll often hire a consultant that says, here's what you can do, but not all consultants are equal. So to the extent that you can try to be, I mean, some consultants work exclusively for developers. That's all they do. And they tend to produce slightly different reports, in my opinion, than people who, like John or I, who actually work with cities as well as developers.
So you're saying base it on a private consultant's?
Well, yeah,
No.
so here's
So
yeah.
what I would say is, yeah, you would adopt prescriptive measures, like you'd have a plan list, native plan list,
Okay.
a density of the which plans, you know, and like the city of Portland, in fact, many jurisdictions, certainly in the metro area, spell that out. You can only do this.
Yeah.
And it's easy to follow, or relatively easy to follow.
And you could update that in the future. Because I
Oh,
feel
you can
like
always update it.
there's been lots of ideas of restoration throughout the different decades.
Oh,
Like what we did in
absolutely.
the 80s to restore
Yeah.
could involve, you know, things that we would never do.
Exactly right. Yeah,
The more we learn.
yeah.
I got a question.
Mike, go ahead.
So,
Yeah, I had a question. So looking in that picture that was up from the Salem Reporter, so how is top of bank defined? Are we talking literally like up where that road was? Are we talking the ordinary high elevation?
The rule defines it as the ordinary high water level or the 2-year annual flood.
Okay,
Yeah, and so that's spelled out. That's not something most people know about. This is where it is. I do a lot of canoeing, kayaking, and you can sort of look and say, this is like the top of the bank. You can see where the water line is, it's different colors, that kind of stuff. And so I think if you can always have an expert, but I think there's some role for a knowledgeable staff person to say, yeah, this makes sense to me. And it's a local decision. It's not a DSL decision where that is, although it could be appealed. So if you have something that's, to me, if it's very obvious, like that one photo that I showed, you know, but the top of the bank is definitely not where the road is. It's down lower where the river stream normally flows. If you always want to be safe, you'd always hire an expert. Okay. So that's where this good.
It seems like we're gonna have struggles with that because many of the streams within the urban growth boundary are incised. So
That's right.
so the 2-year flood elevation is kind of a guess at best. So it's gonna be trying to figure out something that the staff can work with consistently. I think is really gonna be important, trying to figure out how they can apply this.
That just jogged my memory for another question. Did you include piped streams? in-
Pipe dreams or pipe streams?
In this, in the inventory?
no, not if there was if it was a culvert, you know, or a pipe. Yeah, it wouldn't be
You wouldn't
inventory.
be buffering the pipe?
No, definitely not.
And something, this actually came from a jurisdiction I won't mention, where we wrote the code and did the inventory. And I came back years later working for a property owner that called me and said, the city's like to talk to you because they're saying that this piped stream is falling tree inventory and I can't put my driveway over. And I said, no, no, that's not what we said. And so as much specificity as you can have on those things, because what will happen is you'll get a new city council. Staff will change and ideas will change. And so clear definitions is super important. And when I went to staff to talk to them, they said, no, that's how we enter. So it was a lesson to me that to be specific.
I'm just gonna give an example. When we did our CFEC tree canopy standards, we worked with Mylan. And he said, these are the trees, this is the diameter, at what year, at 15 years, this is the soil volume, very prescriptive in our code so that, you know, developers, applicants, and staff could have the same working knowledge if this is what we accept or don't accept.
Yeah. Good example. Yeah, and do you have like a native species list that the cities adopt?
We're working on one. We have a good street tree run. A lot of our riparian protections are within our tree code. And in general, it's, you know, we encourage people to plant native riparian plants, generally up to the discretion of the urban forester. But we do have a list that we provide, but we don't have it specifically spelled out in the code.
And there's a lot of lists out there that are specific. So again, those things, and they don't all have to be in your code, but list of trees on file with the planning staff, which can then be adjusted. I've seen trees go out of style, as in not native enough. And also, it's kind of better to keep a tree there no matter what it is than to remove a tree because it takes a long time to replace that value.
Mike?
Oh,
You
you're
did.
muted.
Sorry, I was about to hit unmute and my toolbar came up. So in that one of the slides, it was shown quickly about what the exemptions are within that, or what's exemptions to prohibitions in that 50-foot buffer. One was about replacement of existing structures. So, for example, like the MAPS building, that's right up against the creek. If in, I don't know, 20, 50 years, whenever they wanted to tear that down and put a new building, would they be allowed to construct it as it is, or would they be required to move it now beyond that 50? And that's just an example.
It says you have to have a provision that allows for replacement of existing buildings. Every standard in there, I think, needs some qualification. But in your example, I think, yeah, they could just replace the building where it is because it's existing building. That would be my reading. I don't think that part was ambiguous. What is a structure can be ambiguous. Is a road a structure? Sidewalk? Yeah. Let me go back to this slide. I think the answer is yeah. It's automatic. You have to let them go back. See, how do I get my
The P down there.
You have to share it.
So this example here.
Oh, wait, yeah, can you share on that? Oh, no, you don't want that share.
Yeah, get out of
The Zoom
Yeah, the
share.
Zoom share, yeah. Yeah, Zoom and then,
Move the mouse up.
Help me.
yeah, it'll be in the bottom middle there. So if you just move it into the black. Yeah, that's
Here's
it.
somebody do it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, you just please.
Yeah, it's just this one. And then if you wanna go.
No, that one here.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so this is a picture of Mill Creek going right through the campus of Lamb University. Something I'm really familiar with because I used to walk back and forth between, what was the name of that bar, lunch, dinner place that right on the creek?
The Ram.
And that's how you get to the offices at LCDC when I walk back and forth. And on one side, you see intact riparian vegetation. The other side, you see a sidewalk, you see an armored creek with rocks that holds the bank. You see lawns, you see trees. So one's a park and one is not. So the rules say you're supposed to replace, you can remove invasive vegetation like a lawn and replace, but you should replace it with native species. Does that mean that the Willamette University can't plant a bush in their lawn? I would say that that's not the intent. The intent is if you that area is essentially not protected, you could encourage them to plant vegetation as a program, but I don't see that as a requirement. People could disagree with me on that, but just in terms of working with Willamette University, do you really want to tell them they have to take that 50-foot setback back beyond the sidewalk, they do a construction project or something? That's to me a judgment call, and it's not to me spelled out in a rule. It's a good idea, but maybe not on a college campus where it's used as a sidewalk. And so those are some of the questions you'll have to address. And I think it would make sense to be fairly specific and say, here's when you must replace. If it's ivy, if it's really an invasive species, it's taken over, that kind of thing. Like where we showed on the road, we definitely want to replace that with native species. But Willamette University, I would tend to leave alone in this situation.
Our tree ordinance, we have a provision that allows the replacement of existing landscaping within the 50-foot area, of the.
And we already protect, you already can't remove a tree or native vegetation in the riparian corridor. So we already have that part today. We just don't have that you can't build new things.
This will not a setback.
Right.
Yeah. So I did also look at your existing vision. It's kind of not very strong, I didn't think, in terms of it's fairly.
No, it's not a setback.
It's not a setback.
So I mean, I think that it could be, if you adopted safe harbor, that would supersede or integrate with what you've got there. Again, with more specificity, building in very limited flexibility so that you don't have this problem. This is the biggest problem I have seen with safe harbor, is that you put it along a creek and you've got a developed subdivision with fences. And the subdivision person in one lot talks to his neighbors. And then you have 30 people showing up at your public hearing saying they want to take over your backyard. I suggest not going into people's backyards, especially in developed subdivisions with fences, with swing sets and all that. So you have some flexibility for dealing with that developed situation. And this is something you could also do. This doesn't fall in the category of the free parts because you're paying. So I think what I would recommend is that you do a very limited, as in 2-page easy analysis that allows you to recognize developed subdivisions, define what that means, where they have established yards, fences, and say that they can replace this, put a shed, put a swing set behind a fence in those yards in very defined situations. Otherwise, if you're doing it, then you're saying, no, you can't put your shed, we've already got a fence. It doesn't make sense to do that, and it's the type of thing that can undo your ordinance. Pretend you folded your arms, you just screen or your wooden thoughts. It's one of those situations where when working with cities, we had whole program put in jeopardy because of that one issue. In my backyard, that's my castle, that's sacred to me.
with the limited ESBC analysis, would that take it out of the safe harbor realm? Would that kick it into?
You do adopt a
different-
safe harbor and then you would modify it. You know, it'd be almost like adopting on 1, 2. Here's a safe harbor. We're going to take what amounts to citywide variance adjustment to that provision, and we do it in the easy process. And I have done that before, and it's been done successfully. And that is because I say this because I really believe in this program, but I don't want to see it shut down because the city council has many angry people at your doorstep, and you don't have an answer for that. That may happen, but it will not even with anything we do.
Yes, I think sometimes fences next to streams can adversely affect people downstream and upstream.
Yes.
Because they collect stuff. Now, it might be safe harbor, it's been there, but it also has a long-term perpetual negative effect on the stream corridor and on the neighbors. So when can the city come in and say, hey, no, you can't fence?
Well, if it's new development, you clearly cannot put a fence in there.
Right, but existing.
If existing development, you're right, it'd be better if the fence were torn down and if riparian vegetation was planted in the backyard. All I'm saying is I think it would be very difficult to carry that out in practice. Because you have, I know along Mill Creek, a lot of situations where people are right next to the street.
I just wanted to point out that, so goal 5 was established 50 years ago.
Oh, 50, let's see, you said 73, John.
Yeah, so 50
Actually
something.
75.
That wasn't my slide, so whoever put that slide together.
It just-
That's what LCD
The
established.
statute
The
was
rule was
adopted in 73.
Yeah.
Sure.
Goal 5 was
Just
adopted.
as an
Exactly
example.
50.
So for me, it's always helpful to back up to the big picture. The intent here, like in my view, for goal 5 was, and for all the goals was like, what's not developed yet? What can we protect? And how should we guide our development? And because we've kicked the can for 50 years in Salem, now we're dealing with mostly developed properties. But for me, I see the biggest benefit to our sponge qualities is for the undeveloped properties. So like that's where I am more eager to like get this work done so we can have that set and that is an expectation in our community. And so there's less blowback moving forward, I guess.
You said that so much better than I did. And that's really what the informal policy of a lot of places is looking forward, doing in some situations, especially if there's support for it, like in that article where the neighbors are getting together, then it makes a whole lot of sense to do it. But that has to be written very carefully. And
which is why I think it's very important to grandfather in our current uses and not try to be ripping out fences in something that's already been built and established. Yeah.
So another possibility in Corvallis, I mentioned Dixon Creek, they had houses right up to the creek, And they said, what are we going to do that we'll do a modified safe harbor? We're going to have 50 foot, but we'll allow them to go back to 5 feet. And realize also you allow it to reduce the setback. So another thing you could do, which is less draconian, is to say, if you want to develop within a 50-foot setback, you have to do some restoration in the stream bed within 25 feet. That would be still not happily accepted, but it would be, or you could have a city-wide program working with the watershed council that encourages the city. And this is none of this is in the safe harbor rules. It's just my experiences in trying to implement.
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to keep in mind is we're not talking about the riparian corridor, we're talking about a buffer to the riparian corridor. So I would be hoping that there would be some provisions that would allow for a reduction of that buffer with enhancements.
Yeah.
Because as someone who does work mainly for private development, I don't like buffers for buffers. And I think when we're looking at Salem being an urban space, we're talking about lands within the urban growth boundary, we need to recognize that if we don't use the land in the urban growth boundary well, then we have to add more land quicker to the urban growth boundary. So unless we're talking about the de-urbanization of the urban growth boundary, we need to keep in mind the fact that the urban growth boundary is also supposed to provide urbanization.
And that would be the variance process that we're required to have under the goal.
The hardship variance.
Well, I would like there to be just an outright, you're allowed to, which Albany has in their safe harbor, an outright, you're allowed to reduce the setback if you do an enhancement. So we're enhancing, rather than just a 50-foot buffer that's left for nothing, reduce it down to 25 feet and provide more enhancement.
Was Albany, was it a true safe harbor or did they do a standard and or the easy process?
So remember,
It ended up being just a safe harbor.
so did we use safe harbor in Albany?
Yes.
That was the basis, but then we modified it.
It was a safe harbor with a reduction in the buffer if you provided enhancement.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you. And I think the safe harbor allows that because there's a discretionary process. So we haven't talked about clear and objective discretionary. You all know what I'm talking about in housing, right? You can beat over the head because the rule is always there, but it didn't become state law until a few years ago when people began to pay attention to it. Because the Goal 10 rule has always said you had to have clear and objective standards for housing. So is the Goal 5 rule. And so the base, and this is extremely important, I think. The base is you protect 50 feet. If you protect 50 feet, you're done. As a discretionary option, you can reduce that setback by as much as half with restoration, and then spelling out what that means. So another way to approach the backyard is, that might be a reasonable compromise to say that you can't do anything within 25 feet of your backyard, above the stream within your backyard, if you do restoration, and the rest of you are allowed to, and that becomes at least a type 2 process for staff, could be a planning commission thing. I'd recommend a type 2 process. It's just because it gives you a bit more flexibility to make sense, and then that your type 2 can be appealed to the planning commission. It allows you not to have to go to the planning commission and have their agendas get jammed. And then you have fairly objective standards for how you apply that 50 to 25 reduction. And that's another way of doing the same thing that would not require an easy analysis. And when I'm talking about an easy analysis, I'm talking about a 2-pager. These properties are recognized as backyards in them. Here they are, we've inventoried them. These properties, the benefits, economic benefits, social benefits are better if you do limited protection. And so you're effectively amending the safe harbor. That's option 1. Option 2, do the same thing on a case-by-case basis with discretionary review standards. And if you could also require that anybody that does anything within that 25 feet has to do enhancement of the remaining 25.
And think of this as saying our variance process, any other way would kind of get there. It would be similar to that, but you're not looking at it, want
I
to go
don't
through a
want to
process.
go through a type 2.
So
I
can
don't
you,
want it to be appealed.
yeah, so can there be like from the outset, just a 50, a reduction of 50% for, what, based on what you're doing along the riparian corridor built into a safe harbor, or does that need to be more supported by the
Well,
EDC
the safe
process?
I can see why you're asking the question, it's unclear. So I'm saying option 1 would be consistent with the safe harbor. You can reduce the setback to 25 feet. You have to or protect 50% of the riparian, so it could be 10 feet here, 60 feet there or whatever. If you do the following mitigation, and that gets, I think, your question too, sir, about, yes, there are issues we want to address. That's consistent with the safe harbor. The other option, and this is something that I've done before, but it's never been litigated, and DLCD has never objected. I don't know if DLCD would say we agree with this or not. But if you say, we're going to identify all these situations using GIS where people clearly have their backyards developed right up to the stream, we're going to reduce the setback for these folks to 25 feet based on this ESE analysis that staff provided. You don't need some outside expert to do that. And so in both of those, or some combination of the two, and the reason I say this again is I think for an ordinance like this to survive in Salem, I used to live in Salem for many years. I have some sense of the local politics, the local community. I just think you need to build in some flexibility so you don't get this avalanche of public opposition. And I think that using the same thing more eloquently.
If I have a fence across the creek and it during high flows, it actually blocks the creek and it floods my neighbor's house. That is my liability, isn't it?
Well, I would say that's a clear violation of the ordinance.
Well, the fence is already there. I know there are fences out there that are already up and they are across the creek. And what I'm trying to is maybe it would be, if it is my liability to have a fence that ends up flooding my neighbor's house, I would think it'd be good for me to know that. And even to go out and let people know, hey, by the way, your fence is within the riparian area and it may cause trouble for you.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Ken.
Two things. One, to Mark's point, Public Works does have a program like in Gold Crest Brook, where they're doing restoration along the stream where houses were built within 15 feet of the top of bank. So there are activities within the city to address the problems that history has created for us. But I think the other challenge that we have going forward, looking at the future development, is trying to integrate the riparian vegetation ordinance, the riparian safe harbor and floodplain ordinances that are coming, that are going to be looked at by the public as this complexity. And I can't imagine the staff keeping their hair. Well, I guess. Yeah.
Nice job.
Considering the complexities that will be involved, because we do have a riparian vegetation ordinance and people argue about the effectiveness, but that in company with the riparian safe harbor ordinance, I think is really going to be important to make sure that those can mesh well together rather than compete in some way or get confused. And then the floodplain requirements that are likely to be coming will provide probably more onerous overlay to all of that. And I think the real challenge is to develop a riparian program that integrates both the desire to maintain healthy riparian vegetation, allows for rational development, but also protects floodplain functions.
Well, isn't the best case scenario where your floodplain and your riparian corridor overlap? Because then
That's not
Then you're not-
reality, though.
well, I
It's
think
not
that
always reality.
it's not always reality, but in a lot of, I mean, where we're worried about flooding, they're gonna overlap.
Not necessarily.
But
Well, because the non-fish very,
Especially if you go upstream, that isn't the
That's
case.
true.
Yeah.
so that's really what.
But-
But I guess I'm not understanding why they can't overlap,
The riparian zone
or what makes
under
them
the
confusing.
floodplain regs would, if adopted, is 170 feet.
Right, so then that would control.
It would.
So, yeah, so Ken, I could not agree with you more.
But that's a mitigation standard, not a protection standard. So it's a, so the juggling here is not easy. You're juggling chainsaws, bowling balls, and acorns, I guess.
I will say, so we are gonna start diving into all the details in phase 2, and we will meet again. So we will have done a lot more research on what other cities have done, what the options are, what the impacts are, the mapping, developed property, undeveloped, like we will do all of that and bring that to our next RAC meeting.
Yes, the other thing I would suggest, and what we have done for many jurisdictions, is what Ken is talking about, you could do. Look at your own floodplain ordinance. Look at how it's structured. Make sure the people at the counter understand the relationship, you know, when people come in. And cross-reference at a minimum. Also, if we talked about the safe harbor in goal 5. There's another safe harbor, and that is goal 7. It's because you have very broad powers as a city under goal 7 to regulate development within the floodplain. And you can go beyond the minimum standards required by FEMA, such as limiting development, especially now that floods happen every 10 years instead of every 100 years. Have a rational program that links natural hazard protection with natural resource protection. They go together, and I have talked about politics. You're protecting people's homes and property. That's different than protecting the birds and the bees in many people's minds. And they too will go together, even though the boundaries are different, right? So anticipating how they work together and some cities have actually adopted a waterways topic ordinance, water that integrates floodplain control with natural resource protection in the same general sensitive lands type of ordinance. And even though they have different boundaries and they can protect different things but overlap. And so if you have both a flood issue, flood protection issue, combined with a natural resource, that's a pretty powerful argument for having those areas where there's mutual boundaries pretty much off limits, not encouraging the development of floodplain is a pretty good idea.
I guess I'd rather them not be combined. I don't
Yeah,
I don't understand why it's so complicated to look at them separately and go, oh, okay, I have to take the greater of the two.
Some do it. I think most do not. All I'm suggesting is you cross-reference, and then sometimes there could be conflicts between the two. Explain that even though you're in the floodplain, you're allowed to build a house that's a foot above the flood elevation. You can't build because of the safe harbor provision. And so you're definitely, when people look in the floodplain, they don't go home and say, I'm scot-free. Oh, we have to look at this too, making that really clear and have something in your plan policies that explain how they work together. It's useful. Yeah, it doesn't have to be in the same ordinance at all. And we have drafted, like, we've often done, let's do the natural hazards first, followed by natural resources, and then the natural hazard protection establishes the baseline for looking at the incremental level of protection that occurs through natural resources. So it's just useful, as I think Ken is saying, to look at these sensitive areas, hazards, water quality, and goal 5, natural resource, in an integrated fashion. Makes a lot of sense.
But it doesn't have to be the same ordinance.
No, but you might have
So you could.
an area of comp plan explains here's our policy general, here's how we implement the policy to various ways. That's what comp plans are supposed to do. It's often not what they do, but it would be a useful thing instead of just amending the ordinance look at the comp plan too and tell the bigger picture. Also with the inventory copy is part of the comp plan. So it's a good time when you're adopting the inventory to look at the policy framework. That's it.
Are there any other questions? In the spring. Generally in spring. So the inventory, once it's done, we will send it out to everyone. But the next rack is really gonna focus on this phase 2. And so we're gonna need some time to do the analysis and options.
So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Then we're gonna have a public meeting probably prior to the next rack, where we'll go out to the community and talk about
That's the
this.
first time that's.
Will those be at neighborhood associations or just a general public meeting?
You're planning right now, just have a general public meeting.
Okay.
So should we expect materials between now and the spring to review so that we can get better?
Yes, so we will be getting drafts, like John was mentioning, from this kind of phase 1, sending those out as well, and have to provide a little bit of background information, and probably at some point sending, we'll send out these slides here from today, as well as it might be worth, sending out the structured framework of what we're proposing to talk about in phase 2, close to when that meeting ends up kicking off.
Y'all have our emails.
It's a long winter ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah.